Welcome everyone to the first episode of the SJX podcast. I'm here with Brandon Moore, who is in Seattle, and I'm in Singapore. And we are here basically to talk about watches. The reason I've decided to do this is that I have gotten a lot of feedback and requests from readers who want to who have various questions and who want to hear us discuss the topics of the day in watchmaking. So we'll just get straight into it, and I'm going to outline what we're going to discuss today. We'll cover some of the recent headlines in the news. One is the full year's Swiss watch exports, which were just published by the Swiss Watch Federation. Second, we'll touch on LVMH Watch Week, which just happened. We'll talk about the products, what we think, and last, we will talk about Watches and Wonders, which takes place in 3 to 4 weeks' time, and we'll talk about what we expect and what we think is going to happen for the year. So, Brandon, you took a look at the Swiss watch export numbers as well last night. What were your thoughts on it?
I think that you can ask around and folks can kind of tell that we're in kind of a downturn, and that was borne out by the numbers down about 2.8% versus last year. But the story is the same as it's been for a while. There's a kind of a increasing deviation between expensive watches and inexpensive watches. Below the $3,000 price point, you're down, double digits. At the upper end of the market, you're actually up. So, units are down, but you still have bright spots at the top of the market. Rich people still want to buy
Yeah.
expensive watches, and so that has continued. And so you see that in the strength of brands like Rolex, Patek, AP. Although, anecdotally, people are, you hear stories of the for exhibition only labels coming off, things like that.
Wow.
So there's some softness potentially even in that part of the market. What are you seeing and hearing from
Well,
folks around the world?
I think in the numbers there are a couple of interesting points we can note. Swiss watch exports as a whole will be dominated by the strong brands, which is namely Rolex, Patek Philippe, and a handful of others. I'm guessing these brands are 70-80% of the value. Um, these the biggest is Rolex, and Rolex all of its distribution actually is third-party retailers. So I think one possible takeaway is that third-party retailers are helping keep the numbers better than they are because retailers have to take inventory of watches. If Rolex delivers watches to a retailer, they have to take it, whether or not they have end clients. Now, for sure, the retailer can sell the Daytona and the GMT in steel, but there will be some watches that will take a bit longer to sell. Uh, so these good brands with popular products are the bulk of the numbers. I'm guessing that the remainder, the minority of the market, is actually performing weaker than the headline number of value is down by 5%, right? Year on year, it's down by 5%. I'm guessing the other brands are weaker than that, which is it's telling for the industry because majority of the other brands, I think a lot of them will be smaller niche brands, which I think you as a consumer is starting to see on the watches that are available on the gray and secondary market. Uh,
So,
yeah,
so just to go a little bit deeper on that, um, I think what you're saying is, we're likely seeing a buildup of inventory at some of
yeah,
these party retailers, just like we have seen in previous times
yeah,
when the sell in to the
yes,
retail channel is really what people's bonuses are based on
yes,
in many of the Swiss brands, and
yeah,
so that's even that being down, we're maybe seeing even more
yeah,
softness in the sell out number, the sell
yes,
through to actual
yeah,
consumers. And so, there could be a an accumulation and the need to unload inventory to the gray market potentially, or
yeah,
even you know,
yeah. I think
heaven forbid, buybacks.
for the strong brands like Rolex, I don't think a brand like this will ever overproduce. They will never make that much more watches than they can sell because they can afford not to. I think for the smaller brands, it might be tough, and they may have to keep producing. Like if you look at the Swatch Group's recent numbers, they just published the full year results, and those were down as well by quite a lot. And then the share price also fell after the numbers came out. So I think that's and also actually to touch on the point of inventory, if you look at Swatch Group's balance sheet, the Swatch Group's inventory is also going up, which means that its finished watches are not going to retailers, are not going to consumers, but staying on its own books, which is always not a good sign. But I guess the upside of all of this is that if you like watches, there may be more watches to buy at better prices and greater availability than before.
Yeah, I think maybe continuing on this theme a little bit, the theme of, where watches are sold. You touched on the secondary market, but, a big trend of the past few years in the primary market is brands trying to own their own distribution, to control the story that the consumer is hearing about the brand, to control which brands they're shown alongside. As well as to capture the margin that would typically go to a retailer. But selling watches is hard. I mean, you ask people in the industry who have tried to execute a strategy to roll out retail at a brand that has historically essentially been a business to business supplier
Yeah,
in a sense. Their customer has always been a store, a professional buyer who is armed with a lot of money, a lot of insight, and perspective on what their customers need. Suddenly, they're selling to someone that's never heard of their brand.
yeah,
That's a completely different mentality. And so, thinking about what we're seeing now in the market with accumulations of inventory, like you said, at the Swatch Group, even at within the brands themselves, not even selling into the retail channels, strikes me as something that is brands are going to have less and less appetite to continue
mm,
to expand that. Obviously, some exceptions. I think that
yeah,
some of the strongest brands in the market, whether those are AP, Richard Mille, are going to probably want to continue their strategy of control. It's arguably, I think, worked well for them, you might say. But I'm curious to hear your take on what all of this means for where watches are sold and where people should be
right.
looking for their next watch.
I think what's happening now, and you hear and you see it already, is that some of the really strong brands are actually continuing their strategy of pruning the retail channels. You hear of Rolex, Patek, they're actually closing retailers everywhere in the world to have fewer but better retailers, bigger stores, a better experience. And I think for such brands, for a brand that's thinking about the long term, this makes sense because if demand is a little lower now, you could close a store. That is a good time to be closing stores and to focus instead on the better stores. Uh, so I think this is something that will continue because these brands can afford it and they know if you are taking a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-year horizon, you can close your retailers and you just have fewer retailers but better retailers, especially in countries or cities that are relatively accessible and a store is within, say, I don't know, half an hour, 1 hour. I think the other interesting thing is that I'm also hearing a little bit of uh, retailers giving up brands or giving up boutiques. So there are some boutiques for some brands that are run by retailers, but retailers just give up because it no longer makes sense.
Hmm.
And they either close it or they return it to the brand, which is I think that's quite telling. Of course, this doesn't happen with any of the top brands because if you sell a top brand, you're more or less guaranteed that you will sell watches every day, every month. But it's happening for some of the niche brands that are just too specialized.
Hmm.
Uh,
I think, for some of the specialized niche brands, a couple of the things that have caught my eye recently, certainly the opening of the Journe boutique in London.
yeah,
Back when I lived in London, there was no Journe boutique. You had to go to uh, William and Son. which I don't believe exists, at least not in quite the same way as it did then. But now there's a nice boutique on Bond Street. Um, and now also, I believe MB&F opened up a location in Silicon Valley, like actually in
Uh,
Menlo Park, I believe.
yeah,
So, really interesting strategy for them, outside the kind of core LA, downtown San Francisco, downtown New York, kind of the norm for, I think where most consumers expect to see a store like that, but
yeah,
it's I think really clever because I think they've got a product that appeals to that kind of iconoclastic thinker, somebody who's not in necessarily in a suit and tie all day that is going to want you know, a Rolex in the
yeah.
boardroom. It's, somebody who wants something a little bit more interesting to wear, in a more casual environment. So I think that's a good strategy, and I would love to see more brands think about a more outside the box strategy for where to put their stores. Not just are we going to sell third party, are we going to sell in our own
Mm,
boutiques, but where are we going to put these? And
yeah,
it's nice to see creativity there. I haven't seen
yeah.
that in a while, and
Uh,
so that definitely caught my eye when I saw that news from MB&F.
I think what you're saying, I think this is something that also will be driven by economic reality because rents, I think, in many big cities, especially in Asia, have gotten so expensive that watch brands have no choice but to look elsewhere for their boutiques. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago in one of the Richmond AGMs, Johann Rupert was speaking and he was saying, just complaining about landlords in Asia because he says nowhere else in the world can landlords in malls especially charge so much. So I think this is also reflected in the fact that more and more brands are opening like lifestyle apartment spaces uh,
Hmm.
on upper floors of buildings rather than street level stores or the typical mall stores. You know, you see this with AP, all these AP houses around the world. Many
Hmm.
of them, even in Hong Kong, the AP house in Hong Kong is on the upper floors of a skyscraper of an office building, rather than being a conventional store. This all brings well from the perspective of the brand, it brings the customer a new experience, something that the brand feels is a better experience. But I'm sure also it probably costs less, or if it costs the same, they get a lot more space.
And I think it also gives both the clients as well as the brands themselves
Yeah,
a sense of security and safety, which I think is becoming more top of mind for
yeah,
people, especially in some of the bigger cities.
yeah, yeah.
Well, speaking of, mainstream luxury brands with kind of historical focus on leather getting into
Mhm.
watches, might be a good segue into LVMH Watch
Watch
Week.
Week, yeah. What did you
Yeah.
like from LVMH Watch Week?
I really like the cases of the tambour. I was looking at the images and the separate lugs, the really delicate engraving around the bezel. I really think they're doing some cool stuff with the cases, and I think that's something that that's a really underutilized canvas on the watch is the
Yeah,
case.
yeah,
It's very difficult to do. Most brands have to outsource the production of their cases, and so they're often pretty generic. And so I thought uh, the craft on those cases is very nice. Um, the most interesting thing to me from the entire event, though, was actually this idea that uh, some of the capacity at Zenith is going to be repurposed to be more of a watchmaker's watchmaker for the other brands in the group. And so, you did a great editorial on this. I'd love to kind of hear some of your thoughts around that, but after I want to hear what you liked from the event.
well, like you, I like the new Tambor. The case is very, very well done. I think the case reflects more than anything else how much money Louis Vuitton has invested in case making. I visited the case facility in Geneva. I visited it last year, and you can see they've really invested in the top of the line, cutting edge equipment, not just to produce the components but to finish them. I think the most interesting thing actually is something most people wouldn't notice, but it is the frosted finish on the concave interior of the lugs, which can
Yeah,
only
some of
be
the
which can only be done by laser. So this is laser frosting, which is not artisanal, it's not handmade, but it's very expensive to do because the laser machine that does that, it costs a fortune. I mean, like it costs as much as a house. Um, so, but that shows that artisanal handwork is not necessarily the best thing all the time, because to get that kind of detailed finish is something you cannot do by hand. But it's a very cool looking finish.
when you look at the joinery between the lug and the case, you can tell that they're two separate pieces because otherwise it would be impossible. But even that's impressive, right? It looks kind of impossible. You look at it and you go, how did they do that? And you can kind of reverse engineer that it had to be a separate piece to go on there. But just that experience as a consumer is is exciting. It creates a sense of mystery. It exudes expertise. It exudes a perspective on what they were trying to do. And I think that it's whether it's by laser, whether it's by spraying it with actual sand, like as is done, on dials and cases at FP Journe or Ferdinand Berthoud. Um, at the end of the day, the outcome is just a good, interesting product that you just want to touch and look at
Yeah,
repeatedly and have on your wrist and look at how it catches the light.
yeah,
And that's the ownership experience that I think a lot of people look for in these products.
yeah. And I think this is reflected in the new family of in-house movements as well. That you see in the new Tambo family. This is a very high quality. It is a industrial caliber, but very high end. I would say it's equivalent to what you see in brands like Vacheron, Jaeger-LeCoultre, which are respected watchmakers. And Louis Vuitton is not a watchmaker, but it has conceived this family of movements that I've seen the construction of the movement, the parts exploded, and so on. And you can see that this will form the base of a whole family of calibers,
Mhm.
bigger, smaller, with complications. And there's all the details that you would expect in a high-end movement, with interesting finishing that's slightly different from convention. I think this shows that they are serious about making watches of a certain quality.
Yeah. Yeah, and I told myself I was going to try to get through a watch conversation without talking about a free sprung balance, but I was very relieved and
Yes,
excited to see that there
yes,
is one on this new
yes.
caliber. One of the other little things I liked is the just a little detail that I like that not very many brands do is they put the hallmarks on the gold rotor. I think that's just a nice little detail.
Yeah,
It's an extra little bit uh, of provenance
yes.
for where that is
Uh,
because 100 years from now you're going to be able to go in, you're going to be able to map those markings, the letter
yes,
code in the little head of the
yes.
Saint Bernard, and know exactly
Yeah,
where this gold was
yeah,
assayed. You're going to know exactly what grade of gold it is. You're not going to wonder if it's plated. It's
yeah,
just a nice little detail for those folks. And then the second thing that I think is interesting, setting aside the interesting complication of like the spin time and so forth, the clear jewels, the large clear
yeah,
jewels that kind of give you X-ray vision into the watch. I think that's a really underutilized um, uh, elaboration
yeah,
in watchmaking. It
yes.
is giving you a true view into the watch, not through like skeletonization, but through novel and new ways to show how components are
Uh,
engaging together. I think that's another nice thing, and I
yeah,
do think that to me this is the spin time specifically the coolest implementation within the new Tembor
yeah.
collection.
You mentioned hallmarks. I think one of the interesting things to know about the new caliber is that I was told, okay, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this publicly, but that the construction of the caliber was done so that it will qualify for the Geneva seal if they wanted to, even though it has no Geneva seal. So a lot of the parts you don't see, they still qualify for the seal. So which means even you take all the bridges off and you reveal everything, you won't find any wire springs. for instance, right? Because wire
Hmm.
springs are not allowed in the Geneva seal. So I think it's a possibility that one day we'll see the Geneva Seal hallmark on this movement, not on the ones that were launched in the Tambo, but I'm guessing there will be iterations of the caliber for higher end models that will be finished to a different level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. That was one of my first thoughts when, I was thinking about obviously, they have done Geneva Seal grade movements in the past at Le Fabrique du Temps. Um, but certainly having now that the seal applies to the case as well, understanding the fact that, LVMH has set up their entire ecosystem, almost their own watchland, to borrow the Frank Muller term. Uh, in Geneva, they certainly can do that if they choose.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, another thing they're doing there is Daniel Roth. The new
Hmm.
Daniel Roth Extra Flat is a really nice watch. Uh, and I think the interesting thing is that it's not just it's made in-house in Geneva, LFT, but it's actually a better watch than the original.
Hmm.
So even though it looks the same, the quality of execution is much higher, which is interesting because very rarely do you find a product that is a reissue, remake of sorts that is actually done to a higher level than the original instead of in terms of the quality and artisanal skill.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that was yeah, clear with the tourbillon, and then I think that there were some reasonable questions about like the exact choice of the typography and whether it was as elegant
Yeah,
as the original. Um, but I do hope that with the extra flats, it kind of follows the pattern that we saw with the tourbillon, and that there will be some additions with
yeah.
a
There
clear
will be
case
a
a
regular
clear case
production
back so
version.
we can
Yes.
actually see this new
Uh,
movement that
uh,
you described. And
uh,
yeah, I always love a new ultra thin movement. Do you know if it's shaped just like the tourbillon to fit the
yes,
case?
yes. So it's a form
Okay.
movement that echoes the shape of the case. It's really very, very well done. I think the execution of the Daniel Roth watches so far is really, really impeccable. The quality is great. I just hope that eventually they will do something new rather
Hmm.
than only focusing on watches that are remakes of the vintage originals.
What do you think about this way of using Zenith as the maybe the ETA of the LVMH group?
I think it makes sense because historically, well, not historically, but in the 90s, 80s, 90s, maybe to the 2000s, Zenith was primarily a movement maker for other brands. Uh, I think at one point in time, it was selling many, many more El Primero movements to other brands than it
Hmm.
was in its own watches. Uh, I think, however, I think today Zenith is not actually big enough. It doesn't have the capacity to really become uh, a factory for the entire group. It's just not big enough. It could supply, ultra thin, automatic, and El Primero here and there, but it cannot become a large scale factory because it's just not big enough to supply that many brands. I also don't think the setup, the nature of production at Zenith is of the industrial level that's required to become a supplier for all the brands. They would have to,
Hmm.
I think, revamp it quite a lot, or buy another factory, buy another movement maker, and integrate it into Zenith, or set up something completely new and entirely. I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
Oh, I was thinking about this in the context of the article we published a couple of years ago on watchmaker hours per watch. Zenith, among the industrial producers, produces fewer pieces per human that works there
yeah,
than most of their peers, and so that kind of speaks to your point about
yeah,
the relative level of industrialization there.
yeah,
Now, it also arguably adds some of the charm, maybe that there's a little bit more of a human touch involved. The operations are a little bit more antiquated. That you know, is part of what's cool and
Yeah.
quirky and fun about watches, but it does make it, a little bit confusing to think of them as like a movement powerhouse that's just going to be
Yeah.
pumping out movements.
Because I think um, for for the group to have a movement supplier, it would need to have scale, industrial scale. It would need to have industrial quality, which is, I think, quite difficult to achieve. I'm curious to see whether or not LVMH will buy a movement maker uh, or build up something from scratch. Richemont has built up something from scratch, but I think it took like 20 years, 30 years. And even then, arguably, Richemont's industrial calibers that are used across the brands are very entry level, and they're not of
Hmm.
the quality of, say, the industrial calibers from Swatch Group that are supplied
Yeah,
across the
or
brands.
yeah, you know the and correct me if I'm wrong too, but like it's a relatively limited range of products that are produced kind of at that concentrated level within Richemont. It's not
Yes,
You don't get the same breadth that you do from Volche, for example, with
yes,
their Retropont, um, their high beat
uh,
chronograph, all of the ultra thin, the tourbillon, all the different
yeah.
things that you can get white labeled uh, at extremely high quality. Is not something that we've seen really elsewhere. But
Yes.
uh, maybe that group is for sale, but probably not going to land with
I mean,
LVMH.
yeah, that group has been for sale for the longest time, and it's one of those like it's like an eternal truth in the industry that Porsche is always for sale, but it's always for sale with Parmigiani, and nobody wants to buy another brand. They just want the factory. I
Hmm.
think, and also the fact that Hermes has what 25% of Porsche, it probably complicates things. So now we can look forward to the next big watch event of the year, Watches and Wonders. What are you hoping to see, or what are you expecting?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm hoping to be wowed like I was last year with one of the watches that really impressed me uh was the Piaget uh Altiplano Ultimate Concept Tourbillon. The 2 mil thick tourbillon. Um, the wearing experience of that watch, the sensation of seeing the tourbillon rotating in that space on both sides. Um, that was just a great experience, and so I'm looking for that. That sort of visceral rush, and I wasn't even in a very good mood for that session. I had been trying on some watches that I really didn't like and was really disappointed by, and so I was extra astounded when that
Oh,
watch came around and I put it on my wrist. So that's the experience that I'm hoping to replicate. Who will do it? I don't know.
yeah,
Um, but I'm hoping that someone will. So whether it's one of these brands that's celebrating a big anniversary,
yeah,
like Vacheron, or um, you know, we'll see. I'd
I,
love to see something from Vacheron that can actually fit on my wrist and
yes,
not on a table. As
yeah,
amazing
yeah,
as the Berkeley Grand Complication is,
yeah,
it's a little more fun for me when it's the miniaturization aspect of watchmaking is something that
yeah.
I find very very exciting and enjoyable. So that's something I'm looking forward to.
I think uh, because it's such a big anniversary for Vacheron, and because it has already launched the two pocket watches, you mentioned the Berkeley, and I think also because Vacheron is the last time it introduced a wristwatch grand complication was 2005 for its last anniversary. Uh, Vacheron is also the only brand in the Holy Trinity that doesn't have a major grand complication because Patek has the Grandmaster Chime, AP has the Code 1159 Universal.
Hmm.
Vacheron doesn't have anything equivalent yet. So I think logically, I think Vacheron would be working towards something along those lines. Um, I sort of know a little about what it's working on, but I can't say publicly. But I think it will be interesting. And it should be something that lives up to what the brand is in terms of its stature in the industry. And I think also it would be a good thing uh, that sort of marks a pivot away from highest profile watches in recent years of the brand, which is the Overseas and 222,
Hmm.
which appealing as they are, to me, they're not that interesting. So I think that should be this anniversary should be interesting. Um, the other anniversary, of course, is Breguet. I have no idea what they're going to do there. Uh,
Or when they'll
uh,
show anything,
yeah,
right? I mean, it's not like they're going to be
exactly.
in the halls at the
Yeah.
Colexpo.
I mean, arguably that should be the biggest of all, but who knows what will happen there. You mentioned brands that are coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the Altimeter watch, which is Breva. And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are pretty cool. I don't know that I've ever seen one in real life, but I remember them kind of they were sort of vaporware still when I
uh,
was getting into
yeah.
watches.
I think they
And
actually produced a few because I've seen them.
Okay.
I've seen them sold. I think one or two have come up at auction since then. But it was very, very short-lived. I think
Hmm.
the brand came just as the market started to slow, and it lasted maybe 2 or 3 years. But for people who haven't heard of them, this was a brand. Well, the brand was founded by somebody whose first startup was jeans. He started the company selling very high-end jeans, which he sold. He made a lot of money. He started this watch brand, which was the first watch brand with mechanical barometer, altimeter, and also some measurement devices for hiking, diving, and all that in the watch. And they were like 100,000 francs, which in hindsight is insane, but at the time it was okay because people were selling multi-axis tourbillon for 700,000.
Yeah.
And the brand lasted 3 or 4 years. It disappeared, and now it's coming back. They're going to show in Time to Watches in Geneva, which
Yeah,
is
I think I'll have to make it over there to
yeah.
check those out. Yeah, there's a few other, new brands. There's we just had a story, PS Horology,
Yes, yes.
from Peter Speak. Yep.
Peter Speak is making a comeback, which is interesting. Uh, I mean, he was like a really prominent name early 2000s. So that's like
Hmm.
more than 20 years ago. He was one of the up and coming stars. And he actually made really good watches. He had a lot of
Hmm.
success, and but unfortunately, the crisis sort of took the brand down. And now he's coming back with a new product that is I mean, you have seen it. I think it looks good.
Hmm.
But the movement is not that interesting. It's a Vaucher movement with very little mechanical modification. So it'll be interesting to see what he launches next, whether or not
Yeah.
he applies any of his skill to produce something from scratch.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't mind the Vacher movement, at least for now, because looking at, I think I probably read every deconstruction on the Naked Watchmaker at least two or three times, over the years. This was his website that he launched
With his
after
wife.
depart yep,
Uh,
after kind of stepping back from his first brand where he would, take apart movements, photograph them in outstanding detail, component by component, almost no editorializing, almost no uh, you know, telling you if it was good or not, letting the parts speak for themselves. But you could always tell that he had an affinity for Vacher based on the things that he would fixate on and show. And so that to me really shows that he has an affinity for those products. And if you have an affinity for them and really believe that they're good, I mean, you're not going to recreate something like the Vacher micro rotor movement, in a few years on your
uh,
own. It's just not going to happen. That's a
yeah,
very, very sophisticated, very mature, very
yeah,
precise, very high quality movement. And so, um, I think it kind of makes sense for the product, at least at this point. Would I love to see something like his, those in-house movements he was making at one point? Um, just lusciously beautiful German silver, incredible. incredible finishing, interesting, kind of index regulator with sort of a double swan neck, one on
Yeah,
top of the other.
yeah,
Yes, that's I like that stuff. I would
yeah,
love to see that. But um, you know, he tried it once. It didn't work out that well. He's trying something different now, and I definitely wish him the best.
yeah. I think the movement you mentioned is the SM2, the SM2
Hmm.
caliber. I think I was actually just talking with Peter recently, and I told him, and he agreed that the movement was just too early. He launched that, I think, just right during the financial crisis, 2008 or 2009, which is the worst timing.
Hmm.
And that's what, 16 years ago now. But today, I think a movement like that would be appreciated by the audience. If you look at what is selling today, I think this would be an easy sell, even at
Hmm.
60, 70,000 francs. But he did it just too early.
Hmm.
But today, ironically, today a movement like this will be the path to success. Time only,
Hmm.
high level of finishing, a lot of things to talk about: German silver, anglage, free sprung balance, all of that. Black polishing, black polishing.
Hmm.
I think today will be an easy sell, but it was just too early at the time.
Yeah. Also, there wasn't much in the way of aesthetic differentiation between the models that had that movement
Yeah.
and the ones that came before that were much simpler. And I
Yes.
think there was also a
Yes.
pretty significant price difference between the two. And I think that
Yes.
that was, um, probably challenging
Yeah.
for the market at the time.
It was like, I think, 3 to 4 times the price.
Hmm.
And I guess in a way that is what you mentioned is a strength and a weakness of many independent watchmakers. Most of them are wedded to a certain look. FP Jones, all
Hmm.
of them more or less look the same. Daniel Roth, of course, everything is the same. And I think that will, I mean, Peter, even though it's a round watch, fairly conventional, it has a fairly distinctive aesthetic. And so it is very, very difficult to get out of that look. I cannot think of an independent brand that has successfully created more than one iconic look or case.
Another kind of newish brand came out last year that I'm interested in to see at in Geneva this spring is Albashorn. I'm, the new chronograph movement, kind of developed on with a lot of 7750 Solita architecture, but slimmer, more
Yeah.
refined, said to have a, smoother pusher feel for the chronograph. So I'm really interested to
Yeah.
see what those look and feel
Yes.
like on the wrist.
Yeah.
So hoping to check those out.
I think you haven't seen them in person, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised because Sebastian, the guy behind the brand, uh, the simplest way to put it, he knows what he's doing. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. Last year when he launched the brand, I met him, and I mentioned to him, I told him, we should do something together because there's something I've always wanted to produce, but it's never been made. And when I told him what I had in mind, he told me he has exactly the same idea, and he actually showed me a drawing of what he was working on already. So I think that shows that he's not only technically proficient, he can not
Hmm.
only reconstruct and refine existing caliber, he also has a good knowledge of vintage watches, of history, of design, of what a watch nerd or watch geek would
Hmm.
appreciate. So I think we probably will see interesting things coming from his brand, uh, but I think he hasn't yet reached a scale or a size where it can become a very strong recurring business that's enough for him to build a company around.
What other brands are you looking forward to seeing, or other expectations do you have for Watches and Wonders
Uh,
or Time to
I
Watches?
I think well I expect for aside from big brands that have major anniversaries, I think there I'm not expecting very many big surprises. I think the approach is fairly conservative now for many brands. You mentioned during an earlier conversation about brands just going back to iconic models and focusing on the icons. I think this is what we will see actually for a lot of brands. I know for a fact that a few brands are relaunching iconic models or launching new variations of iconic models. Um, I think where we will see a lot more activity or action is with the niche independent brands. We already talked about a few of them that are being revived, and I think there are others that will continue to try to expand the product line. I think for many of them, the challenge is that they will be launching watches they conceived over the last 2, 3, 4 years, which may be the wrong product for today.
Mm.
But that's always the case of the watch industry because things take a long time, and by the time they come to market, it's too late. Uh, I think it will be. I think the one of the most interesting things I'm looking forward to learning is not so much a product, but what the retailers think. Because we talked
Mm.
about Swiss watch exports earlier. Retailers are actually the clients for many of the brands. So whether or not they want to continue representing the brands, whether or not they want to order more inventory, new inventory, that I think that will be very important for the state of the industry. And where
Hmm.
I think another thing is whether or not retailers continue to pick up new brands. Because during the pandemic, when things were good, and in the period just after, retailers everywhere were picking up new brands because there's just not enough supply to satisfy
Hmm.
demand. And independence was so hot that all the independents could find representation. And even retailers that historically didn't sell independent brands also began selling them. So
Hmm.
whether or not this trend continues, I think will be quite interesting to see.
Thinking about that, we did the interview with Lisa Bridge, the CEO of
Mm.
Benbridge Jewelers, a large Rolex dealer here in the United States, especially the West Coast of the United States. Um, and they've opened up some new concept stores called Timeworks that are sort of like, multi-brand boutiques in a way. Um, Focus on some smaller brands like they have Norcane and Grand Seiko and things like this. Um, I wonder to what extent supply of Rolex easing and becoming more available in the coming years will impact retailers' appetite to take the risk on some of these smaller brands, or if that in a way a response to the shortage of Rolex.
I'm sure it will impact the appetite because it will also impact consumers' demand for watches.
Hmm.
I think some of this demand was a substitution effect. If you cannot get the the number one watch on your list, you move down the list to the next one. I think if you ask any watch enthusiast, majority of them, if you gave them a choice between a Rolex Daytona and stainless steel versus a integrated bracelet sports watch with whatever Boucher or Celita movement, they're going to choose the Daytona. So I think this the substitution effect was very strong, and you saw that I think especially in the hottest categories of watches, sports watches.
Hmm.
At the top, you have the Royal Oak and Nautilus. In the second level, you have some others, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. But all of them are offering the same kind of products. But if you cannot get the Royal Oak, you move on to the next one, the next one, the next one. Now, I think the substitution effect is happening within the brands because it's becoming a little bit easier, for example, to
Hmm.
get the Royal Oak. So if you cannot get the Royal Oak in, I don't know, 37, 39, whatever size that it's the standard size now, in blue, you could substitute with the one in gray or in white or in blue with a diamond bezel.
Hmm.
Rather than go down the list of brands to the fifth choice of integrated bracelet sports watch of some niche brand, when you can stick to the brand that was right at the top of your list. Okay. So is there anything else we want to cover today?
No, I think this was a lot of fun. This is I've never done anything quite like this
Yeah.
before, but I think this is a great format, and I'm excited to talk more, especially as we get closer to Watches and Wonders and we start to
Yeah.
see more of the pre-Watches and Wonders releases. Fortunately, the brands keep us pretty entertained this time of
Yeah.
year with releases because
Yes.
they don't want to be overshadowed
Yeah.
by whoever might be coming out the same day.
Yeah. I think it was a lot of fun, and I think we should do this regularly. Especially I think during periods where there's a lot happening, I think it'll be fun to catch up and to talk about what's in the news.
Yeah, especially if there's, products that are kind of a little bit outside of what we're able to produce full stories on just
Yeah.
due to time constraints.
Uh,
Yeah, looking
yeah.
forward to catching up
And
next time.
maybe we could even do something during Watches and Wonders if we can set it up to do something live or after the
Hmm.
show, one of the evenings. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a
Okay.
lot of fun.
Cool.